there's no undoing a tragedy of this level, right? I mean, you can't, I think about
Yeah.
my victims' families. I think about the way it changed the course of my family's life forever. I don't have a relationship with the only brother that I have who's left alive. The other two have died because of my crime.
Welcome, everybody. So, since my son was a little kid, I had always told him that I didn't want him to do two things, make two mistakes. One was to do drugs of any kind, and the other was to commit a crime. We could handle anything else as a family, but those two mistakes have a tendency to take your life in a trajectory that is sometimes profoundly negative, right? Now, few people know the true impact of those mistakes than today's guest, Cheryl Armstrong. When she was just 16 years old, she was convicted of a crime with some others, a crime in which two people were killed. And despite her young age, she was tried as an adult and she was given a sentence of a mind blowing 96 years. So, for nearly 3 decades, that's where she grew up. And she lost appeals and she lost hope. And at some point, she came to just accept she was either going to die in prison or she was, at best, going to leave as a very old lady. But something kept gnawing at her. She didn't want her life defined by one mistake, one action she took when she was a teenager. So, after nearly a decade of being, in her words, a miserable mess, riddled with guilt, riddled with shame, she took control of her thoughts, filled her time with positive purpose. She got a college degree, she got a master's degree, and she began planning her life, betting on the hope that freedom would come. And it did. The laws surrounding extreme sentences for minors changed, and she was released. And what she has done with that newfound freedom will inspire you, and how she's trying to help others in their need for reinvention will give you a better feeling and strengthen your belief in the power of a second chance. Cheryl Armstrong, welcome to the show.
Cheryl,
Hi, thank you.
welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay. Wow. I'm just going to get right into it.
Wow.
Wow. Wow. I
That
mean, what an
96,
intro,
right?
by the way.
Wow.
Very good intro, Mark. You were sentenced to 96 years at the age of 16. That's, even I think at the time, that was super controversial. Do you I mean, I'm sure you do. You remember that moment pretty vividly. What happened? Like,
I never expected to get 96 years in prison. I, at the time I was 16, I didn't even know what a presumptive range was. So when I found out that 96 years was possible, I still couldn't wrap my mind around that. And I thought that would never happen. So when I was at my sentencing hearing and it was crazy. Typically they allow the prosecutor to do their presentation first, and the victims' families and whoever else gets to get up, make their statements, read their letters, and the judge refused to allow them to do that.
Yeah. I saw
And I
that.
remember thinking, why is that happening? Well, it was happening because he had already made up his mind that he was going to give me 96 years before the hearing ever started. So the defense, our side, was allowed to present our, statements. My family got up and spoke. I read my statement, all of that. The prosecution never even presented, and he just sentenced me to 96 years. And
but I mean, you were a minor, right? I mean, you were 16. Why did they charge you as an adult?
well, they had what they called I'm initially from Colorado, so they had what they called the
Oh,
summer of violence a couple years prior to when my crime happened. And they held a special legislative session after all of these juvenile crimes were committed,
mm,
murder cases. And they created these new harsher laws for juveniles. And I mean, this was happening across the country, though.
okay.
There, thousands of cases where juveniles have ended up with life without parole sentences
Wow.
or virtual life sentences. That's what my sentence is called, a virtual life sentence. So, um,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, this was common practice in the 90s.
When he came down with that result, I'm sure you and your family were crushed.
It was devastating. It's hard for me to describe to people what I was going through emotionally and mentally because I believe that a part of me just went into shock.
Yeah.
And so I was almost numb to what was happening. And so you would think that there would be this outpouring of emotion, but there really wasn't initially. As the months and the years started,
Right.
that's all of that came. Yeah.
What was it like walking as a 17-year-old, right at that point? What was it
Mhm.
like walking into an adult prison? Was there this holy shit moment?
Right. So just to say this, I want to just clarify
Yeah.
that's a total embarrassment for me now as an adult.
Yeah.
Oh.
Uh, I
Sure.
was a suburban white girl, had a good upbringing. I don't have excuses. I don't have trauma. I made bad choices. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
Uh, there was a lot more, as you said, holy shit moments that came when I was first arrested.
Oh.
I talk about how when I was in the juvenile detention facility, I had said on the phone to my poor mother that if I went to prison, I was going to kill myself.
Oh.
And I feel a lot of guilt behind that statement because I can imagine what that did to her at the time.
Yeah.
But I was just convinced I wasn't going to be able to handle it when, I was like, I can't do this. This can't be my life for the rest of my life. I never did attempt anything like that, but I had a lot of thoughts around that because being in prison for the rest of your life in my mind at the time, that's not living, right?
Yeah.
It's a miserable existence. And I just felt so trapped. But I will tell you that the county jail was so miserable
Mm.
that I was actually somewhat relieved to get to prison.
I've heard that. I've heard that county jails are worse than federal prisons.
Wow.
Very true. I was in a state prison,
You
but
were in a state.
yes, county jails are worse than the prisons for sure.
What was so miserable about the county jail? Just bad conditions, like.
Yeah. Yeah. So they had me in segregation, first of all, because I was a juvenile. They wouldn't house me with general
Right.
population. And so they gave me this little janky black and white TV because they were supposed to afford me the same privileges that the other people got there. And so I would get to go outside for an hour every few
Oh.
days. I would wake up in the mornings to grab my breakfast tray, and there'd be ants crawling all over the floor. I will never forget it. It was just disgusting there, and a lot of negative energy, a lot of addicts that were, fresh off the streets. And so it was just a terrible environment.
When they moved you
So
over
yeah.
to state, what was the difference?
Well, prison is a different and there's a different vibe to it. And I will say that there is obviously many bad things that happen in prisons. And when I first was in prison, it was more like a real prison, I always say. That changed down the line. But when I got there, I had my own room. So back then, they housed you based upon your custody level. I was closed security, the highest security level, because of the length of time that I had received in prison and my charges. So I actually got to go and live in my own cell with my own toilet, my own sink. Um, but there was intimidation factors going on. Like, I was just 17 when I got there. And so instead of trying to just chill out, I kind of felt like I had to dig my heels in deeper
Hmm.
and portray this image so I wouldn't have problems because I knew like this is where I'm going to be. I don't want to be a victim in any way here. And so that's what I did.
So what does that mean? So you like staked your like this is how
I just
you
had
weren't fighting people, like.
No,
Yeah.
no, I'm actually really not a
Yeah.
very violent person.
Yeah.
I've had probably a handful of fights or violent incidents in my lifetime. It was more just this angry, hateful energy that I was emanating. And I was very verbally abusive, threatening to other people, very negative, hateful person.
That was the past though, right? I mean, that was the past.
Oh
And then
yeah.
I think you even have said in some podcasts too that you were just an angry teen. I think when the whole thing came down, you actually were on probation for anger control classes. And do you think maybe that was one of the reasons why the judge was a little extra harsh on you or
No,
no?
I don't. So I think the crime that we committed is the reason
Yeah.
why. I mean, it's a about as bad as it gets. Uh,
Right.
and, and I said, I think I talked in my book about how I gave them plenty of reasons
Oh,
the maximum sentence, even though it is harsh. It seems absurd because I was in the car. I didn't commit the murders. I did have plenty of involvement. It was my idea to go to the house that night, and took me about 10 years to even be able to take responsibility for that out loud.
I
It's a
and I
heavy.
I appreciate that accountability. I think that's awesome. I just wonder, like that angry teenager, like, and we know because we have teenage, or I've had a teenager. My kids are in their 20s now, but where do you think that anger comes from? I mean, you don't have it now. Somehow you've shed it, but like when you were a kid, where did it come from? Like what?
I don't ever think that I will completely know the answer to that question. I know that I was alone a lot.
Hmm.
My parents were working all the time. I had all this time on my hands. And when we moved to the suburbs of Denver, I was just seeking acceptance where I could find it, honestly. And so the people that I ended up clicking up with were making bad choices. Now, that doesn't mean that anything that I ever chose was anyone else's fault, but I just got in with those wrong types of people. And that's how I started smoking weed. And then I was experimenting with other drugs, and which led to me using meth for a while up until my arrest. And so, honestly, I feel like I would have become a serious addict had I not gone to prison. In
Wow.
some ways, it saved me.
Wow.
Uh, I think the anger thing, because I evaluated that for many years when I was in prison, and again, not blame casting, but all of my brothers, my dad, my stepdad, they were all really fantastic people to the people they loved, but they were also all very violent.
Hmm.
And there was just this common thread amongst them that nobody was going to mess with them. And they had the final say in anybody that challenged them on anything. And so I kind of equated respect with anger,
Wow.
you know. And I almost want I worshiped my brothers when I was a kid, and so it's like I wanted to model that same type of behavior.
Were you the youngest? How many brothers do you have?
Three brothers and four stepbrothers.
Whoa. So you were the youngest and the only girl.
Were you and are you haunted at some level by what happened?
Absolutely.
How so?
Yeah. Well, there's no undoing a tragedy of this level, right? I mean, you can't. I think about
Yeah.
my victims' families. I think about the way it changed the course of my family's life forever. I don't have a relationship with the only brother that I have who's left alive. The other two have died because of my crime. It haunts me because what we did was absolutely terrible. We took the lives of two people that didn't deserve it, and over pretty much nothing, right? Teenage drama.
Teenage drama.
And it's hard to say those things even 30 years
Yeah.
later out loud publicly. But I think that it's important that I take accountability for the lack of care and respect that I had for other people when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
But also, the whole turn your pain into your purpose. Like I'm a living, walking example of that, because the ways that it haunts me, I use that energy for good now.
I'm wondering, was there a moment when you were in state and you were like, when did you decide that you wanted to like change your attitude? And you talk a lot about mindset. So when did you say to yourself, you know what, I am going to change my mindset? Like, what was the pivotal moment?
I think that there were probably a handful of them, but the one that I wrote about in the book is really a very simple moment, and that's why I've become such a believer of how the little things are the big things. If you're paying attention to what people are saying and to the signs you get in your life, you notice those little things, and they can completely change the course of your life. And I basically was talking with a good friend, the only positive friend that I had at the time, and she was telling me how people respected her and she was kind to them. And I remember talking about, oh, well, I feel like I need to act the way that I do because I want that respect from people. And I just recognized that that wasn't real respect. And that isn't really the impression I wanted to leave on people anymore. And it wasn't how I was raised either. You know, my mother was the kindest person I've ever known in my life. She was not violent. She was not an addict. She didn't, you know, she had no toxicity associated with who she was. And so I just decided like, I can't stand myself anymore. You know, I was tired. It takes a lot of energy to be that miserable every day,
Right.
year after year. And for what? You know, it just digs you in a deeper hole. It doesn't make any sense to live your whole life like that. And so I'm like, I've got to do something different here, whether I'm in prison the rest of my life or I get out next year. This isn't who I want to be anymore.
And what was the first step? Like, what was the first thing that you did to change? Was it getting books, reading, applying to school? Like, what was the first thing you did?
I started taking college classes, but when I first did that, my heart wasn't in it yet. I was doing it for my mom, but I started realizing like, oh, I actually am, you know, somewhat smart individual, and this is giving me a sense of purpose. So my education, that's what it did for me more than anything else,
Right.
because in my mind, I thought I'll never be able to use this college degree. What's the point? But it changed my character. And I used to think in such black and white terms with everything, that getting more educated really helped me to see the gray areas in life. And that was a big deal for me. My thinking used to be very rigid.
At what point was that? Like, was that how many years in? Because at that point you were
Approximately 8.
okay. Because at that point you're still thinking, I'm here for 96 years.
Forever.
Like, I'm here forever. I can't imagine, like, okay, now just like what you said. So I'm going to get a college degree and still be in prison. You know what I mean? Like, in for the rest of my life, to have that sort of internal motivation, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. What it did is just gave me a sense of purpose. And I really needed that. I needed to feel like I was not just the person who committed my crime, because I wasn't just that person. In my heart, deep down inside me, that isn't who I really was. And so I needed to prove to myself, as well as really the rest of the world at that point. Like I wanted people to know I'm not bad through and through. There's a lot of good things about me, but I was so lost in my guilt and my shame and my anger and all the pain I had. It was hard for me to dig myself out of that hole.
You know, it reminds me of something that Clayton Kellum, a gentleman that we had on our show who had gone to prison. I can't remember how long, but he was, I think, 21 when he went to prison. He was relatively young. And he said he had to have the realization that this is not who he was. This is just something that was on his timeline, which I thought was well put. Because he knew he was going to get out at some point. It wasn't a sentence as big as yours or as long as yours. But he also said that he had a very different prison experience because there were a group of older inmates who saw his potential, knew what he could become when he got out, and took him under their wing. So he had a very different experience. He had this sort of like guidance and protection and encouragement and support. Did you have anybody doing that for you at 17, 18, 19 years old?
No,
No.
not at all.
Women.
Well, wait, how about a decade later or 15 years later? No. Women? Is that what you said?
Women.
No,
Is
no,
that
not really. Not really. That's more of a thing in the men's prisons, anyways, because there's a lot more politics in men's prisons than women's. I actually clicked up with a bunch of negative people when I got into prison because they were just like me.
Yeah.
And so I
Right.
clicked with people, and there were a couple of positive people around me that were older and had done some time already, but and they kind of claimed they were trying to take me under their wing, but I really wasn't available for the taking. I was just so lost in the other part of what was going on. I wasn't interested in that yet, anyways. So
So you just
mm-mm.
found one friend, one positive friend the entire time you were there?
There were a couple.
A couple.
She
There were
did.
a couple.
She didn't need them because she had this newfound purpose. And then, but when you did have the newfound purpose, the people who were around you in your world, like, they had to probably try to drag you down, right? I mean, there's nobody that was like, "Oh, this is great, good for you, Cheryl. Let's see you go to college and graduate."
There weren't necessarily a lot of people that tried to drag me down, but what I have found happens is the more that you change for the better in prison, the lonelier your life gets. That's how I always explain it, because you just don't click with people anymore. There's not a whole lot of people in there that are really dedicated to changing their mindset to such a high degree that they never use drugs again, never go back to prison, or that they're even just genuinely happy people most of the time. Because those are really big changes to make, and it takes a lot of time when you were in as dark of a place as I was as a teenager. And so most people just aren't willing to put in that work, or they don't know how. They don't know how to do it.
Along the way, were you trying to appeal and get the sentence, make the sentence less? Like, were there certain things you were putting in place to try and make that happen? Or like, so like while you're, in college, were you still thinking to yourself, maybe there's a chance the sentence could be less?
I always hoped that. But there were, many different rounds of appeals that I lost, all the way up into like before a few years within my release. When I got out, I had lost another appeal. That one went all the way up to the US Supreme Court. And I really had high hopes for that one, because at that point, a lot of the laws were changing. And my sentence at that point was just like, are you kidding? 96 years for a person who didn't actually commit an act of violence. And we thought we had some good legal arguments, and I still lost.
But you were the first woman accepted into the Juveniles Convicted as Adults program, right? So can you tell me about that? How did you find out about it? Did your lawyer bring it to you, or
No.
no, you found it?
Well, we were very plugged into everything that was happening politically. We had been for years, because my mom was a big advocate for me. And so when the more that I changed, and there's not a lot of people that get college degrees in prison, especially on a master's degree level. So I kind of was an example of, oh, this is an example of a person who is rehabilitated. Look at what she's done in here. And I had a lot of support. And so my mom was actually asked to speak at the hearings
Wow.
for this program that got passed. And it's called JCAP, stands for Juveniles Convicted as Adults program. It was a 3-year program. And basically, they were supposed to be teaching you how to be successful when you got out of prison. Now, there were some elements of it that were great. I had a therapist in the program that I actually bumped heads with. He drove me nuts. He actually taught me some great things, and so I'm grateful for him in the end, because he did show me some things about myself, which of course made me mad at the time.
Right.
And so he showed me some things that helped me to grow before I got out. But a lot of the program, they would teach you how to set goals. That's the example I always use. So there was a lot of frustration for me at that point, because I'm 40 years old, and I'm like, well, I know how to set a goal. I'm not still 16 or 17. And so I just did what I had to do. And do not get me wrong, I am so grateful to the state of Colorado for creating that program and allowing people like me in it, because technically the law changes that happened applied to juvenile life without parole sentences, which I did not have.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting.
So it should
So
not
I'm
have
great.
applied to you. Interesting.
I'm very, very grateful that
Yeah.
I was a part. Yeah.
Did that help you eventually get out earlier, or what
That's
happened?
what got me out.
That's
This
what got you.
program is what got me out. So I got out a good 13 years sooner than I would have been even eligible to ask for parole the first time, because of this
That's
program.
huge.
That is
Yeah.
huge.
So you wrote a book called Plant Your Energy, Face Your Demons and Transform Your Life, which I think you've done. You're facing your demons. You're being very open with us, and we appreciate that, certainly. And you definitely transform your life. In that book, which I think is a workbook style, there's exercises for people who I assume, well, I won't assume. Who's the book for? How about that?
So obviously the main target audience is people who have dealt with addiction, who are, addicts and convicts.
Yeah.
But if you read the book, the book applies to pretty much any human being. We all have thinking patterns that are flawed. We all have something in our past that has traumatized us and affected our behaviors and our thinking. We all want to be better people. We all have triggers. I just explore what all of that looked like for me. And I give some examples of my time in prison. And so I have a high level of relatability with that population, obviously.
Sure.
So that has been my target audience. But as I build my business, I'm trying to expand on what I'm doing. I don't want to just limit myself.
How driven are you today by your lost time? And are you driven at all by a sense of needing atonement for your sins, if you will?
Absolutely. Both those things are what drive me. I always say now that, the best thing that I could do is live my life the best way that I can to honor the people that I've hurt in the past. And also, yeah, I absolutely feel like I have to make up for lost time, so I like to go see things and do fun things.
You probably are inspiring people. What do you think you would say to like a young teen? Like, have you ever, like, I'm sure you've spoken in a group of to a group of teens before. Like, what would you say to help them maybe not go down some of your paths? I mean, I know your book is probably pretty helpful for them too, but.
I mean, one of the main things that I always point out is when you're younger, you're just so caught up in living in the moment. You're not thinking about, having a career, buying a house, having things that mean something to you, creating your own family. You don't think like that when you're that young. And that was the problem with us. And now it's been scientifically proven, right, that your brain doesn't finish developing till your mid-20s. And so I always just encourage people to think about, is this something that's going to matter to you a week or a month or a year from now? And it really never is.
Right.
Most of the time you're like, I'm not going to care about this. And so you get caught up in a moment, and a moment can forever change the course of your life. And so people need to stop and think about the choices that they make, which is kind of the foundation of what Plant Your Energy is about.
Right.
It's just really becoming mindful of what you are doing in each moment of your life, and that's creating what's coming next for you. So we need to kind of wake up and pay closer attention to those little details.
Love that. How about like on the flip side of that? I know you loved your mom. Your mom's been so supportive all these years. So what do you think you would tell parents that are dealing with a teen who might just be a little out of control? And it happens to so many of us.
So I hate when I get asked this question.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, but I'm not a parent. And so I don't think that I was, I don't know. I don't even know that I would be a good parent. So that question is hard for me because I know that when I was a kid, there was nothing that could be said to me. My mom tried to discipline me, or then she tried to be nice to me. She tried every single angle that she could to get me back in line. And there was no talking to me. I did not care what anybody had to say. I was spinning out of control. Now, thankfully, I was an extreme case, and hopefully for most parents, their kid isn't that bad, and they can kind of be reeled back in. But that's where I think that I could have influences, because I have gone down that wrong path. And so, most kids don't really, I hate to say this, but they don't even really care what their parents have to say.
Right.
They're a teenager and they just want to do what they want to do. And that's not all kids by any means, but the kids I was around, that's how we all felt.
And I think that's good for parents to hear. Do you know what I mean? Because parents, I think, believe that they can control in some way, or they might feel that guilt. So hearing that from you, like there was really nothing anybody could have done or said to change the trajectory of what happened to me. So it's so the parents who feel like it's their fault, maybe they're going to feel a little alleviated by that. So I know you said you hate to answer the question, but that is a beautiful answer. I really liked it.
Well, I'm glad you spun that in that direction.
We'll send you a copy of that.
Let's
You
go
can
with
use
that.
that for future.
That's definitely a short.
I actually did used to tell my mom that, though. I said, it's not good, because of course she felt like it was her fault. fault. And I said, you were the most incredible mother. I don't see how you could have done anything better than the way that you did it. I was just so far gone in doing what I wanted to do. There was just no talking to me.
What's the meaning of plant your energy?
Basically, plant your energy is a mindset. I'm trying to teach people to have an awareness that every single thought we're thinking and every single action that we're taking is going to have a ripple effect. It's going to create the foundation for the quality of your life. And I now tell people the quality of your life is a direct reflection of the work you're putting into it. And so we need to be mindful about, okay, when I make this decision in my life, is this taking me the direction that I want to go? And I'm real big on trying to get people to tap into their why. What is your passion in your life? If you could have everything you dreamed of, what would that look like? Okay, so now what's one step you can take towards building that? Because I dreamed of being a keynote speaker, standing on a stage, doing a public speech. I got to do that just a couple weeks ago.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like planting seeds.
That's it.
Planting
Absolutely.
seeds to grow your energy.
That's it.
I love
That's
it.
it.
Yeah.
And we have the power of choice. And I think sometimes people forget that. I work in the behavioral health field outside of what I'm doing with my business. And I hear a lot of people that have a lot of excuses and justifications for why they're staying stuck in these ruts. And I have to maintain a sense of professionalism, but internally, I'm thinking to myself, you're choosing that. You keep choosing to have that life for yourself. You're not doing anything. So I'm always trying to encourage people like take action, do something. If you're not happy with what's going on with yourself, you can change what's going on, and there might be an exception to that here and there in some extreme cases. But for the most part, we create our reality.
Yeah. Have you had any contact with, or has anybody ever from the victims' families ever reached out?
So I've only had one encounter with one of the victim's family members, and it was one of my victim's cousins who I actually knew before the crime happened. I had been around him.
Mm-hmm.
And long story shortened here, I had a good friend who got out and hooked up with this guy. And so I actually called her on the phone one day and she asked me, do you know who so and so is? And my heart just stopped
Yeah.
because he was a person that I actually thought would hold one of the biggest grudges against me for what had happened. And so I didn't answer her at first. I was just so shocked by the question. And then she asked me again, and I didn't even say yes. I said, why are you asking me that? And she told me that she was with him and that the first thing he had asked her was, do you know Cheryl Armstrong? And she's like, oh yeah. She called me mom. She's like, that's my mom in there. And I love her. And he was like, yeah, well, this is why she's in there. That was my cousin.
Hmm.
And so I ended up talking to him on the phone that
Wow.
same day. He
Hmm.
wanted to talk. And that, hands down, was one of the most life transforming and powerful moments of my life. He told me that he had forgiven me many years ago. He said, I'll never forget what happened, but I forgive you. And he said, I knew you, and I know that that's not who you are. I know how it goes. You get caught up in a moment, things spun out of control. He just extended such kindness and grace to me. And he said, I've followed you over the years and I've seen what you're doing in there. And he said, I think that you should get out, that you could do more good on this side than you can in there now. And I mean, I sobbed through the entire phone call. It was so powerful.
How can we help you get the word out, plant the energy? I mean, is it going to the general public, or is it mostly, because I saw on your Instagram that you're giving away books to the prison system, and that's unbelievable. But I'm sure you want to sell some.
Actually, if I'm being honest, I did sell those books.
Oh, okay, good.
That was with a big client that I have, which I'm not going to disclose too much on this yet, but I
Okay.
am going to be going into 16 more prisons in the next year. So
Wonderful.
Yeah,
That is
things are
so
happening.
cool, Cheryl. That's just amazing that you're doing that. Really giving back. Like, honestly.
Yeah.
I
Congrats.
want to help people break the cycles that they have in their lives, you know. Honestly, right now, one of the big things I'm trying to do is just gain followers on social media. And that is a tricky thing for me because I don't know the ins and outs of social media, having
Yeah.
been in
Who does?
prison my whole life. So, yeah, that's what I'm kind of trying to navigate through right now.
What are
Okay.
your handles on Instagram? How can they find you?
Plant your energy,
Okay.
and same with Facebook.
Got it. Plant
Mhm.
your
And
energy.
then I finally created a TikTok, but I'm not a TikToker. I'm trying, like, okay,
It's a thing.
it's a thing. It's a thing. And so I'm trying to kind of get more in line with all of that stuff, but it's weird for me because now I'm kind of old and out of touch with.
Don't you say that. You're a lot younger than me, I think.
A lot.
Hey,
I didn't.
what?
Cut.
Cut
Cut
that
that.
part. Eric, cut that part. We'll push this out and, make sure it's out there in the world. Right?
Yeah, I think people need to hear it for sure. And congrats on all your
Yeah.
current success and this new success of getting into more prisons. That's super exciting. I don't know what the recidivism rate is for women's prisons or female inmates, but you have to have a positive impact on that number. If these are your thoughts, what worked for you, and you're just kind of sharing it so it can work for others. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having this great conversation. And thank all of you for watching us. Take care. We'll see you soon.